last but certainly not least, we have our next topic, transition to adulthood. So we have 4 presentations here that looked at different aspects of whether it's services, access, what the needs are related to transition, and then we kind of round it all out looking at employment for once you're in adulthood. So to kick us off, we have Leah Guerrero, our diversity fellow. She'll present on engaging community stakeholders in research, developing a statewide assessment for transitional age youth in foster care with disabilities.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Good? Cool. All right. My name is Leah. I came to be part of the USED about July of last summer, and I joined this project called Fostering Positive Outcomes. So just to give you some background, Fostering Positive Outcomes is actually a project between the Sonoran USED and the Arizona Department of Health's Office of Children with Special Healthcare Needs, or OCHN. You might hear me say OCHN later. But our intention with Fostering Positive Outcomes is really to develop and create a statewide needs assessment. And we really want to better understand the needs of youth in foster care with disabilities as they transition into adulthood. So just as a side note for my project as well, you might notice that there's not a results box or anything like that. My poster really focuses on the methods that we've been using and that we plan to use so far in terms of engaging community stakeholders, youth, people from state agencies into our research. And that's partly because this is a 2-year project and we are currently approaching year 1 marker for this. So we're still in the process of things right now. So just to keep in mind. Important things, let's see. So we're using a lot of different mixed methods to gather research to create this assessment. And I guess going back to why this project is important and crucial. So there's been pretty substantial research to support that there have been some pretty inadequate outcomes for adults that were previously in the child welfare system, and as well as people with disabilities. And we know also from research that there's a overrepresentation of youth in the child welfare system that do also have a disability. So despite that there's these research pockets of these populations, we don't really see a lot of research that looks at the intersectionality of all of these groups. In addition to that, we also know, well, most of us know that transitioning to adulthood and becoming an adult is a challenging process in itself for anybody, let alone somebody who's facing additional barriers such as being in the child welfare system or somebody who might have a disability. So we want to we're hoping to improve these outcomes for youth that are transitioning out of the child welfare system into adulthood who might also have a disability, and that's what we're hoping to accomplish with our assessment. So if you look on my poster, you can see 4 blue rectangles, and then these are some of the methods that we're using to engage community stakeholders and youth in our research process. So we've established already an advisory group. So we've invited youth who identify with our project's mission, as well as people from Arizona state agencies, community organizations, nonprofits, anybody who is invested in this issue as much as us. And we have quarterly meetings with our advisory group, and they have actually followed us all the way to, followed our research up until this point and offered very important and substantial feedback as to how we can improve our processes, things we might need to add to what we're already doing. So they've been really, really substantial and really, really helpful in our project so far. And they've mostly provided a lot of background for the next blue rectangle, which is our youth and provider survey. So so far what our team has been doing is constructing a survey that's going to eventually be given to youth and providers that identify in these subgroups. And then the results of these surveys will eventually funnel down into the statewide needs assessment that we're going to create in the end. If you see the 2 photos on the bottom of my poster, the first one is actually some of the notes that I was quickly scribbling in an advisory group meeting. So everybody in our advisory group was shooting off different ideas and pitching different concepts and sharing their thoughts. So I was madly scribbling. So if you can't read some of the sentences, I'm sorry, but just a glimpse of like some of the things that we do. And also the next photo is of me and my colleague, Ethan. We're just hosting a discussion and again, gathering feedback from the people in our advisory group. The next blue rectangles, focus groups and group concept mapping are things that we haven't reached yet. So we are planning on doing focus groups throughout Arizona. As most of you know, traveling is frowned upon right now. So this will likely be postponed, but we do plan on hosting several focus groups with youth and providers throughout the state of Arizona, mostly to increase accessibility and offer some more in-person, I guess, sessions to gather this feedback that's eventually going to go to our needs assessment that we're going to create. And then we also have our group concept mapping, which is actually a software that we plan to utilize. And what this software does is that it gathers concepts and brainstorming ideas and everything like that. And it puts it in a software and generates a visual map for all of our stakeholders to see. So the main and important point that I want to stress is that we're very heavily involved in including the community in our research. And historically, as I'm sure most of you know, when research is being done with underrepresented populations, frequently a lot of voices can get left out. And that's not the approach that our team wants to take. The better that we can include youth and the community in our research process, the better that the needs assessment is going to be. And let's see. And yeah, and again, just to reiterate, our whole point is to center the voices of youth in our project. But special shout out to the FPO team who's here, and thanks JC, Michelle, Melissa, Ethan, and Simran. And I think that's it. So yeah. Important project. What are the strategies you've used to encourage youth engagement in the advisory group? That's a good question. So I think that definitely some of the youth have, I know especially like with one of our youth, he actually like recently found employment. So he's expressed wanting to be there a lot and can't. But a lot of the times the youth themselves are really just motivated to show up because of what we're trying to do. And then I know that Melissa, our team member, is pretty consistent at following through with them, checking in up on the youth and seeing if they're doing okay. But so far, it's been pretty driven by the youth themselves.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so next we have.
Oh, JC, there's one other question.
Are there other ways for engagement if one is unable to be there? Well, funny is that recently, obviously, we've all had to switch to Zoom to do things. So our last advisory group meeting was actually done via Zoom. And even one youth couldn't get her video to work. So she typed in everything that she had to suggest, which I can imagine probably was really tedious. But, you know, through our Zoom, we've been able to include the youth that can participate. And that's what it's been so far. It's been a work in progress to roll with the punches. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so next we have Detroit James, and I'm just going to his presentation on what are effective cultural strategies and/or accommodations that support Native American youth in their transition to higher education. Detroit?
Thank you, JC. Yat a sikedo so dene arahashin so di ebenachikon yat a hidedish nidolil. Bibitcon in a slot trots on nebus's chain. Non as a touchy as a chayed and a touchy nationale. A cut out and enishla ado Detroit James Ganesh. Good evening, everybody. I just introduced myself in my native language, the Dene language, and I just acknowledge the lineage I come from and acknowledging the powers and the ways that who identify as a Navajo man and the society and the places we occupy. More so because in education, it's followed through a lot of what my grandmother and my mother do right now. So acknowledging what they have done and how they have influenced what I do now, and how it influences my work. And so what I'm looking at on this is, what are the effective cultural strategies and or accommodations that support Native American youth in their transition to higher education. And so we had a couple of people talk about, how there's a lack of information or a lack of recommendations or resources regarding Native American students, or the Native American population in general. And so, this disparity gets even smaller as we look at students with disabilities. And so with Native American students with disabilities, there's very little data that comes into that. And so when conducting, the literature review, there's probably like only 3 relevant articles that I could have pulled, this information from. But a lot of this interest pulls from my current practice as a behavioral specialist within Tucson Unified School District. What I do a lot and what in the schools that I serve is look at students with disabilities and look at how culturally relevant the material are and how effective are they in preparing our students for within education and even in the transition process. And a lot of this stems from practitioners or educators not having, a cultural relevant background or not knowing, resources that they can pull from when working with Native American Student Services. And so as Leah, she was saying that, that there's no results part on her part, and as well as mine too, because I'm still looking into this, I'm still conducting interviews and data is still coming through, just to ensure that, I'm getting a full understanding of, the educational practitioners that work with Native students. This originally had started out wanting to work with our students directly, but due to these circumstances of COVID-19, I was unable to really reach out to our students and, create focus groups of, what works and what doesn't work, what's lacking in the transition process, or and looking at cultural appropriations that could have been included that would have made the students feel more comfortable in the process of transitioning. And so the presentation overlooks mostly the methods and approaches that we're taking at looking at this, because again, due to the limited amount of information and limited amount of research done, in the specific area, what we wanted to share is how we get to this process of looking at how do we find these discrepancies and how do we overcome them. And so in my methods and approaches, it's a 6-tiered process, conducting the literature review, and then going into conducting the interviews with, tribal educational practitioners. And so these practitioners can come from, the high school level of transitional liaisons or coordinators, as well as higher education practitioners who were previously special educators, and as well as VR officials from tribal communities. And from there, as a participatory action research project, and as well as myself, when we pull a lot of information, it's usually outside data. And so utilizing counter narrative storytelling because of, the experiences I have with the students I work. So pulling a lot of my reflective information from my practice working with these students. So, looking at a lot of the notes and looking at a lot of what notes I have in there for the students, and, what are areas that were lacking that I feel of, or what did I spend most of my time conducting, whether it was meetings or meeting with educators to figure out how to make sure that these strategies or accommodations were culturally appropriate. From there, collecting from all these 3 sources can then ultimately to shape the data and to shape the material, and then going in, and then as I was talking about the PAR, we have another layer that to see that this data and whatever materials comes out of what we're doing here is relevant to the specific communities. So, you know, going back to whether it be through the USED or going back to other high school students that have gone through the transition process, and to see, you know, whatever data we have collected is beneficial for, you know, the specific community. And then, you know, the material will be used for educators across the board, because there's no really guidelines that have that provide that for our students in the practice of you know, of transition. Okay. But yeah, so, you know, the outcomes of this will then go into a paper describing the cultural practices that, you know, educators can utilize, guiding questions for teachers, you know, when they're working with Native students, and how, you know, what should we do? How should we work about them? And then a cultural accommodations template, you know, that students can use as, you know, these are cultural appropriations or cultural considerations that you should take while I'm a student, and that you should be aware of. And then again, these results could be benefit to the USED. Thank you.
Thank you, Detroit. Any questions? All right, we'll move to our next presenter. Ben Olson, he's a doctoral candidate for occupational therapy, as well as a student at the University of South Dakota, who's been working with us. And so he'll do his presentation on the role of occupational therapy in Arizona Transition Services.
Thank you, JC. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep, good.
Cool. So I've really been loving all of these presentations. I'm especially fired up after listening to Leah's and Detroit's. I'm very passionate about this area of transition, and I've been I feel very humbled to have worked with Dr. Perrin Johnson and Susan from the Sonoran USED on this project. So my project was focused on transition services, specifically OT's role for students with disabilities in Arizona schools. For those that don't know, occupational therapy, we look at daily activities or meaningful activities for individuals, what is meaningful to them from their perspective. And then we use occupation as our method for treatment. So I think a lot of times that makes our profession confusing. In fact, when people ask, you know, so you're an occupational therapist, so you help people find jobs. Normally, I have to correct them and say, well, we do more than that. But in the case of transition, it could be just that. We could be helping an individual find jobs. But in occupational therapists, based on IDEA Act, we are already working in schools, and based on our skill set, the literature is saying that we align very well to support students in this transition journey, to support students in an interdisciplinary collaborative effort. But past research has shown that that hasn't always been the case, which is concerning. And so I really was interested in, you know, how could I contribute in this area? And that's why I seeked out this team. But first, I did conduct a literature review just to see what is out there, and it seems to be that is exactly the case, that there's evidence showing that occupational therapy can be effective collaborators using occupation-based interventions, whether in individual or group settings, can improve transition readiness in students through a variety of methods. But past research stemming back to 2005, a national survey was done, and then a little bit more recently, a state survey was done in Arkansas, and they found that OTs have very low involvement, citing some participation barriers, such as just lack of knowledge about their role, not being invited, based on gatekeepers such as administrators or teachers that aren't familiar with what OT could do to help. There's funding issues. Also, just sometimes the fact that OTs, once they can be contracted if the school district cannot find one to hire. So there's many different issues but a lot of the research is dated, and in terms of what it looks like, what does an Arizona landscape look like, I thought a great place to start, kind of like with Leah's study with the foster care youth, is I kind of thought of this as almost like a needs assessment. What is the status for occupational therapy's participation in Arizona schools? Are we helping students with disabilities get ready for transition? That's really how I structured my research question. And I mean, the hypothesis, and just by talking with the experts in the fields, it sounds like it is the case that there's a lack of involvement with OT, but perhaps not. And if that's not the case, then maybe Arizona could be, an example for other states on what works. So what are the supports and barriers that OTs experience in this state? And then are they currently contributing to evidence-based transition readiness approaches? So to do that, I developed a survey with both open and closed-ended questions. I had it expert reviewed by experts both in Arizona and in other states to make sure it was inclusive and understandable, and that the questions would get at the essence of my study. I also included a semi-structured follow-up telephone interview, which I'm actually still conducting this week. So you'll see I thought I was going to have data, but I just fell short to have results. But recruitment, I just used convenient sampling. So I went through the Arizona Occupational Therapy Association for Arizona, which, looking at membership, we believe will give us a representative sample in terms of geographical locations. So another unique feature with this was a multi-site collaborative effort. So I'm from the University of South Dakota. I was situated in Phoenix, Arizona during my time there, and we also worked with a professor from Midwestern, an occupational therapy professor, Dr. Trujillo. So between his expertise in transition, Susan's, and Dr. Parent Johnson's, I had quite the team to help me. So for my results section, or what I learned, I really wanted to talk about, I think, the way that this survey was developed in terms of having both. I'll have quantitative data with the open-ended questions and then supplementary interviews to supplement it. I think this is going to be a really nice study to kind of orientate future advocacy efforts in terms of, hey, what is it that these practitioners need to participate more in these transition services that are very important for these students? And if they are participating, what works? What can we tell other schools or states that they can, what education efforts, or what can centers like Sonar and you said do to help people to get the word out in terms of, interdisciplinary collaboration is one of the indicators for successful transition services. And if OTs are already practicing in schools, why aren't they participating? So I'm really excited to get this data disseminated, and I think it could be really meaningful. So thank you again to everyone that's helped. And if you have any questions.
Thank you, Ben. Any questions for him? Well, we'll move on to our next presenter, and hopefully you'll have a question when we get to our discussion. All right, so last but certainly not least, we have Rachel Rios Richardson, who is working on her Master's of Social Work at Arizona State University. We won't hold that against her. And her presentation, The Employment First Movement and the Tempe Best Project.
Thanks so much, JC. Really excited to be here and share with you all a little bit about my internship as a social worker. I'm a macro social worker, which just basically means that I'm really interested in system level change and advocacy. So my internship with the Sonora and USED has been a really great opportunity because I've gotten such a variety of experience, and really I've become immersed in the Employment First movement. For those of you who aren't familiar, the Employment First movement is actually a national movement that's also happening here in Arizona. And What it's really about is this idea that everyone can work, and it's about promoting opportunities for employment for all people who have disabilities. Unfortunately, historically and currently, there's a disparity in terms of rates of employment for people who have disabilities compared to people who do not. And in Arizona, what that looks like is 76% of working age adults without disabilities are working, compared to only 39% of people who do have disabilities. I think something that is promising is that the most recent data that we have here is from 2018, but in 2017, that rate was actually only about 35%. So we are seeing things trend in the right direction. Of course, with the COVID-19 pandemic, that will affect employment for everyone. And unfortunately, the disparities that we see around employment are even more pronounced for people who have cognitive disabilities. So for people who are working with the Division of Developmental Disabilities here in Arizona, and they're either receiving day program services or employment services, only 19% are in competitive integrated employment. And what competitive integrated employment means, that means jobs that are in the community where people with and without disabilities are working together and people make at least minimum wage. And that's really the goal of the Employment First movement, is to make sure as many people as possible have opportunities for competitive integrated employment. And the Sonoran USAID is involved in facilitating a coalition, a collaboration of stakeholders who are working towards this vision. And Arizona became an Employment First state in 2017 when the governor signed an executive order. But stakeholders are really working on the ground to make that a reality. And the stakeholders in this coalition really range from people who have disabilities, employers, service providers, as well as state agencies, such as vocational rehabilitation and the Division of Developmental Disabilities. So my supervisor, Susan Borrell, is the program manager for this coalition. And through my internship, I really got to be immersed in this. And I gained such a wide range of experience, everything from developing goals and objectives to launching a new Employment First website to being involved in a transition study. Something else I got to be involved in was trainings and technical assistance. And I just wanted to highlight one of those collaborations. So Sonoran USAID is collaborating with the City of Tempe, and City of Tempe has a proclamation to be an Employment First city. And one of the things that they're doing is they have implemented this pilot program called Tempe Best. And what it is about is trying to get more people who have disabilities to be hired by the City of Tempe. Where Sonoran USAID has come in has been to collaborate to provide trainings. And there are two tiers of trainings that the USAID has helped to develop and implement. The first are quarterly trainings for really a wide range of people, employees at the City of Tempe, including hiring managers and HR. And then the second tier is when people who have disabilities are hired through the Tempe Best program. Then Sonoran USAID has been providing customized small group trainings that really go more in depth, covering things like reasonable accommodations, learning styles, person-first language. And so far there have been some exciting outcomes of this program. Since September, about 48 employees received the Tier 1 training. And at the last training, 100% of the people who filled out the survey said on a scale from 1 to 10, they'd rate it a 10 that they'd recommend this training. And then in terms of the program more broadly, so far 3 people who have developmental disabilities have been hired through the Tempe Best program, and the plan is for 3 more to be hired. And some of the next steps of this program are that we're going to be recording some of the trainings, and the idea is that it could be replicated and used in other cities. So I really want to thank my supervisor, Susan Borrell, and everyone else at the USAID who I've collaborated with, and thanks so much for having me.
Great, thank you, Rachel. Any questions for her? Oh, we have one in the chat box. Where are those 3 employees working?
Great question. They're all working for the City of Tempe in different departments. Some of them are working in the maintenance department, but it's really open. The whole program is to really match people with a wide variety of jobs. Will there be a Tucson Best program? That's a great question. So far, there's not any other programs in the work, but part of the idea of this training was so that it could be replicated. So I really hope in the future there could be something like that.
Do we have questions for any of our presenters from this section, from this topic? Oh, we have one for Ben. Can you talk a bit more about the questions you're asking your research participants?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Arman, for that question. So one of the things I think that was a little bit unique about my survey too, that I didn't really go into detail on, was I used NTAC, predictors of success for transition. So some of you may be familiar with them, but I correlated ones that align with occupational therapy practice, so things such as independent living or career exploration, self-determination, and I asked questions to these occupational therapists if their interventions are, if any of their interventions are tailored towards certain things like that. So even if they indicate that they're not directly involved in transition services, I will, in essence, have some data to say that they are working on transition readiness skills, even though they might not be part of transition planning teams. Others more general questions included things such as like, are you being asked to be a part of the transition team? What are some of the barriers to participating if you haven't been? And then open-ended questions to what facilitates your participation, and do you feel supported by administrators? I tried to make it as comprehensive in terms of supports and barriers as I could.
Thank you. Any other final questions? Oh, we just have a comment. Great job to all the trainees. Excellent work and presentations. Yes, thank you all. This has been fantastic. I'm so glad it went so well, our first virtual symposium. And I just want to quickly acknowledge all of the faculty mentors that have worked with our trainees throughout the year. Julie Arman, Tammy Basford, Rebecca Hartzell, Lynn Oland, Wendy Parrott-Johnson, Heidi Pottinger, Yumi Shirai, and Susan Borrell, as well as our community partners who have supported bringing in our trainees to work in their programs. So Integrated Kids, Reed Park Zoo, and the Tempe Best program. And of course, also some of our staff here at the USED who have helped to make this run. So Jeff, our man behind the scenes, who's making sure this is running smoothly and getting our materials out. Kevin Matsunaga, he created our graphic that we've been using for the symposium of the saguaro at sunset. And Valerie Mata as well for her support with our trainees. And so I just want to thank you all. This has been a great year, and we've all been so flexible with what we've had to deal with COVID-19 these last couple months. And so I want to thank you all for joining us. I'd love it if you'd share feedback on this event, how it went, how we can make it better. You can use the QR code. Jeff will also add the link in the chat box. If you could, that'd be great. Stay connected with us. And as soon as this recording and everything is up, we'll also share the Padlet link with everything publicly. And with that, I thank and appreciate everybody for joining us today.